how you going? My name's Tantri. I'm a Melbourne-based ceramicist, and some of you may already follow me and know of my work. I'm really excited to invite you into my studio today. Oh, hello! I'm really excited to welcome you to my studio today for this cute little follow-along tutorial. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask as we go along. We're going to have a little bit of time in the middle where I'll give you some time to catch up and make some things out of clay, and I'll answer your questions then. So bear with me. If you have any questions, I will get them to them. On this little tutorial today, I'm going to teach you how to combine pinch pots to make either a closed form or something a little more elevated like a vase or a bottle-like form. So if you are going to follow along, you may have already seen the Sam Shepparton's post today explaining what you'll need to follow along. Also, if you'd like to just watch and then go back to the video later, it will be in the highlights, so you'll be able to access it later and sort of go back and have a look. So what I've got today for my tools that I'll be using, so this is my studio version, and then I'm going to show you the version of things that you can substitute with things that you will be able to find at home. So I'm going to use this rubber kidney tool. This is my fave thing, I use it a lot. This is great for getting rid of cracks in surfaces and smoothing out your surface of your pot, so this is a really handy tool. And I'm going to be using this serrated kidney tool, little metal one. So this is really good for when you're doing joins to score the surface, so because it's got these nice little spiky teeth. And then we're going to need a paintbrush of some sort. Doesn't matter if it's just an old one or a little one, it's fine. And then if you've got them, some hand building tools. So these wooden hand building tools are really handy. You can use them to make textures. Also really great for helping with your joins. If you like coiling, these are really useful for that as well. And then I've got either some water, or if you have it, vinegar's really good for when you're building with clay as well. So I've just got this old jar with vinegar and a paintbrush. And then optional, but if you have any slip made up, so if you have any clay that you're using today, you can just wet it down and mix it with a bit of vinegar and water, and that basically just makes like a creamy consistency slip, also known as potter's glue. So this helps with your joins, which I'll show you as well. So all of the things that I have, I guess, rummaged around my house and found that I think that you may be able to use as substitutes at home in case you don't have any of these specific tools are as follows. So instead of the rubber kidney tool, you can use a spoon. So the back side of a metal spoon is really good, and that acts in a really similar way. Instead of a serrated kidney tool, you can use a fork, so you can use that to rough up the surface if you want to do joins. You can also use a toothbrush or a comb. So they're all handy things that you'll be able to find around home that you can use. Maybe use an old comb instead of getting clay in your hair. You can use things like skewers and toothpicks to make designs and scratching patterns. And instead of a cutting wire, which is really handy for cutting clay off a block, you can use fishing wire or I don't know if you can see it, but this is some tooth floss. So there's some basic things that you can use for any hand building at home. So if you can find or get your hands on some clay, or I think that the Shepparton Art Museum have posted a recipe for some air drying clay, so you can make that at home yourself if you can't get clay. You'll be able to use these easy to find home things so that you can do this later or follow on. So other than that, great thing when you're hand building that you need to use is a piece of cotton or a piece of cardboard or just a tea towel, something, or paper, something that you can press your piece onto and it's not going to get stuck. And then we're going to need some clay. So if you're going to follow along and you already know how to make pinch pots, if you can make 2 pinch pots of as similar diameter as possible. So as you can see, these ones I've basically made them at the same time, so they're the same size. So if you are already at that stage where you can do that, go ahead and do that. And if you're a complete beginner and you're watching or following along, I'm going to really quickly just go over how to make a pinch pot so that you can also do this yourself later. So what you want to do is get a portion of clay and then turn it into a ball. So if it's a square, you just kind of knock all the sharp edges down until you have a sphere. If you're new to this, I would suggest having a really small portion of clay. If you're more experienced, then enough clay that can kind of fit in your fist is a good amount of clay for a pinch pot. But good to practice with small amounts and then work your way up as you go. So once you've got your sphere, what you want to do is pop your finger, you want to go kind of straight down and not on an angle, all the way in, but not all the way through the other side. So some people may have done this in school, or if you've done any pottery classes before, you may have done this before. So what you should have is something that looks like this. So essentially what we're looking at right now, it doesn't look like much now, but it is the rim, the inside, the outside walls, and the bottom of your pot. So you just pop your thumb into the ball and then you just turn it around and pinch it. So you just sort of do this kind of action. So notice that I'm moving the pot the whole time, and the reason that we do this while we're pinching it is so that we eventually, hopefully, end up with nice even walls. So as you can see, as I pinch it, it starts to grow in size. So you just basically keep going, and you want to make sure that you don't make that top too thin. So you just every now and then just give that a nice sort of swipe over and press that down. And when you do that, just have a look if there's any big cracks on the surface, just kind of rub those out with your fingers as well. So you kind of want to get this till it's about the thickness of your pinky finger, maybe a little bit thinner than that, but not too much thinner, because if it's too thin, it won't be very strong. So I'm just going to keep going on this, and you can just watch me, and if you're following along, it'll just give you a chance to catch up and make a pinch pot. As I said, don't stress if you feel like I'm going too fast, because you can go back and watch this later. So if you're really new to this, you can just watch and then give it a go once the tutorial's done. So you can see it's starting to grow now. We're starting to get our pinch pot. Ask about questions. So if anyone has any questions, this is a good time to send through any questions you might have for me or about hand building, because I'm just going to give everyone a bit of a chance to catch up in case you're making at the same time as me for this tutorial. So if there's anything you'd like to ask me, feel free, and I'll try and keep up with.
I have a question, Tantri. What have you been doing to keep yourself occupied while you've been in your studio?
Ooh, that's a good question. So while I've been in my studio, I've actually been working at home a lot more since we've been in restrictions. But in the days that I do come to my studio, I'm usually glazing or firing the work that I've been making at home. So I've been making a lot of these pinch pot based pieces. So, but otherwise I've been rearranging my studio quite constantly. So rearranging and cleaning and productive procrastination. And then of course making some ceramics as well.
Someone has asked, what type of clay are you using?
So this clay that I'm using is by Feeney's, and it's called White Raku. So fires to be a nice sort of creamy colour, and it's a little bit sandy or groggy. And it's got a really nice sort of raw texture once it's fired. But yeah, it ends up a nice creamy colour. It's a stoneware clay, so if you fire it to stoneware, it's completely functional. You can use it to make tableware, things that hold water. You can do just about anything with this clay. But I like to use lots of different clays, so this is one of my favourites at the moment, but I always shift between different clays. But I really like this one for hand building because it's quite sandy. So if you're beginning with hand building, your best clays to use are things that are a bit sandy and gritty, because you'll find that a lot easier. And then as you get better, things like the finer stoneware clays, they're a little bit more difficult, but then you can, once you've got a bit of practice with these clays, then you'll be able to have a go with that.
And someone else asks, how do you colour your clay?
So I colour my clay using different pigment stain powders. So the clay that I use starts off white, and then I add the pigment powders into it, and then at different ratios that will end up with different depths of colour. So there's lots of different colours, and I do a lot of experimenting and kind of don't really follow too many recipes. I like to kind of just wing it and go with the flow. But there's lots of different methods to colouring clay. So rather than getting into it and boring you all with that, if you look it up on YouTube, there's lots of videos about different methods of colouring clay. And I pretty much use almost all of them at different points depending on what I'm doing. Someone's asking, what's the difference between stoneware and earthenware clay? So stoneware and earthenware clay basically have different temperatures at which they mature or harden or vitrify, whatever word you want to use. So that basically means earthenware clay has a lower temperature. So you're firing earthenware clay to about 1100 degrees, and that's when it matures, and then above that it will start to melt. And then stoneware clay has a higher temperature range, so anywhere between about 1250 to 1300 degrees is where you're going to get where the clay will mature. So those kinds of clays are best for using to make things like vases and functional ware. So cups and plates and all of that kind of thing. I hope that answers it. Alright, so we're going to just carry on with the tutorial, and if there's a couple of questions at the end, I'll try and answer those as well. But hopefully anyone that's making at the same time and following along has had some time to make a pinch pot or two. And if you did make 2 pinch pots, then you may be able to follow along with this next part. If your pinch pots that you've made are pretty big, you might want to just watch and then leave your pinch pots to dry for a couple of hours until they become a little bit firmer or closer to leather hard. That will make this next step a lot easier. But if you've got quite small ones, then you should be able to manage to follow along on this part as well. So as I said at the start, I have already pre-made 2 pinch pots of my own, and the focus on these was that the diameter are as similar as possible. So what I'm going to essentially do is we're going to join them to create a closed form. It's going to look a little bit like an egg to begin with, but I'll show you some different ways and give you some ideas of how you can personalize it to change the end result. So, as I said, this works a little bit better if you give your pots a little bit of time to get a little bit firm and sort of have a bit of air. But it's not completely necessary, but you may find if you want to follow along with this one, if you do it again, if you give it some time, you may find it a lot easier. But that's worth sort of experimenting with, which hand building or ceramics is all about experimenting and trial and error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my serrated kidney tool, or if you don't have that, you can use your fork or comb or toothbrush or a toothpick. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to score the rim of both of the pots. So it doesn't have to be super deep, but just as long as it's rough enough that there's a nice rough surface so that the two pots can kind of suction on. Alright, so I've scored them. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my water or vinegar or slip, whichever you've got, and I'm just going to wet both of the scored areas. So I'm just going to give them a good nice dousing so that they're nice and sticky so that they'll stick together nicely. Alright, so I've scored and I've wet my two rims, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and meet them up, and as I go I'm just adjusting them so that they do a nice kiss. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure, but I'm being careful that I don't actually crush it in my hand.
Someone is asking why you use vinegar.
So vinegar, I don't know the actual science behind it, because lots of people have told me different things, but basically the vinegar just does something to the clay. It makes it, I don't know, I think because vinegar's an enzyme, so it must break it down in a way, and it just makes it really nice and sticky and mushy, and it just makes the clay just want to become one. So vinegar is my hot tip for hand building and joining. And I always put a little bit of vinegar in my slip. So I always mix half water, half vinegar, and I find that that helps as well. So what I'm doing now is I've sort of pressed it on, and I'm just going to give them a little bit of a shimmy, and that's going to help for the two surfaces to kind of lock into each other. So again, I'm being gentle and trying to not collapse the form in my hand. So you can see I'm really holding it quite gently in my hands, but applying pressure without it being like a very pointy kind of pressure. So it's more surface area. And then what we're going to do is, as you can see, you can still see where that joint is. So what you want to do at this point is then start to spread or smooth the clay over the joint. So what I like to do is I kind of like to have a look if there's, you can see here it's kind of hanging over more on this side, so I'll spread that over there. And then if I go here, it's hanging over more on this side, so I'll spread that onto that side. So at this point, what I want to do is basically merge the two sides into one. So I'm imagining making the two pieces of clay into one. So I'm just going to drag some of that clay over and just kind of go up and down, back and forth until I can't really see that joint anymore. So this takes a little bit of patience, and you just got to kind of keep working it until it looks like it's nicely filled in.
Someone says, what a fabulous clay potato.
Yes, it is like a potato or an egg.
And Madsy Louise says it's a flocculent, helps ceramic particles bind together.
Ah, there you go. Okay.
Someone sciencey.
Madsy Louise said it's a flocculent, and we're talking about the vinegar here. Helps ceramic particles bind together. That's what I meant. Something like that. But there you go. Hot tip. Vinegar. Whether you know why or not, it's the one for your slip. It helps the clay bind together. Thanks, everyone, for your science brains. By the way, I'm pretty much completely self-taught as a potter, so I'm not very technical. It's a lot of, you know, that thing and that thing.
Clay potato is a very technical word,
Clay,
I think.
yeah, I like clay potato.
Someone asks, what can you tell us about your new studio?
Oh, well, I can tell you I'm in it right now. So new studio. There's a little bit of secret around my new studio because I've got some exciting things brewing that are kind of weirdly on hold at the moment given our current circumstance. But I can tell you that it's in Collingwood, and I will have a new classroom in my new studio. So I've got a little bit more space than I had before. And as soon as we're all allowed to go out and do our thing again, and once I'm allowed to host groups in the space, I will be running workshops again. So I've got a few exciting things coming up that I'm working on, so I can tell you that much. And yeah, I can tell you that once everything goes back to normal as well, I will be having a studio party, so I'll be able to welcome everyone to come and visit and have a look. But yeah, at the moment there's still some exciting secret things going on. So watch this space. Ooh. Alright, so now you can see I have merged the two sides together, and now I have a clay potato or egg, or who knows what it could be. You can let your imagination run wild. So I actually like to follow a little set of rules when it comes to joining clay. So the main focus really of this exercise is to join and merge two bits of clay. And those my rule that I usually like to follow, and I like to teach beginners, is the 5 S's. So I always say the 5 S's are, and things that you should remember when you're joining clay are: score, so rough up the edge; slip, so prop your slip on or wet it so that the clay becomes slippy; shimmy, so you want to kind of like shimmy the two pieces of clay together so they'll suction on. I've forgotten already. Oh, smooth. I just forgot my own rules. I'm a bit nervous. This live video is exciting, but I'm getting distracted by everyone coming and joining. Hello. So smooth, and then support is always my last one. So some people, I've got other friends that say that they reckon that I don't need to do supporting coils, but I personally like to go the little extra mile and do a supporting coil on my joins. So I'm going to show you what that means now on this potato. For anyone that's joined, by the way, I'm not making a potato, I'm making a vase, but somebody has coined it as the clay potato, so we're going with that. But it won't be a potato for too much longer, so you can watch the transformation. Oh dear, we're falling over. Alright, so what I've done here with my extra bit of clay that I've got, I just made a little coil. So I just rolled it out on the bench and made a nice thin coil, and I've just actually flattened it out. So I've basically got kind of like a strip of clay. Sorry, we're just having some difficulties with the phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify where the join was, and the reason I'm putting this coil on here is just to reinforce the join. So obviously here where we've joined it, it's a weak spot. So you just want to make sure you give that a bit of extra support. So I'm just scoring the surface where the join has occurred. And it doesn't matter if you go sort of, if you score heaps of it, because you can smooth it out later, so you don't have to be exact with that. So you can see. Fancy potato. And I'm just going to score the one side of my coil. So like this. See one side and then the other side smooth. And then I'm just going to pop a bit of vinegar or water or slip onto the scored area. And I'm just going to start to apply a little bit of pressure and turn it around as I go and start to stick that onto that middle part. So it's essentially like putting a belt on your closed form. So I've just put a little bit of the liquid on. I haven't put too much on because if you make this too wet at this point, it's going to make it really slippery and it will make it really soft in the center. So you just want to have just enough so that it sticks on. So what I've got here now is a potato with a belt on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press it on and start to make that stick onto there, and then I'm going to smooth it onto the surface. And basically you want to just keep smoothing it until you can't see that joint anymore. And this is also handy if you're trying this at home and you're finding that where the joint is, it's dipped in the middle. This will help to sort of fill in that gap as well.
Someone is asking, do you use white vinegar or brown?
Just white vinegar. I usually just go the good old, just like home brand Coles normal white vinegar.
Does using vinegar make you want to eat salt and vinegar chips all day long?
Yes, using vinegar in my slip makes me want to eat salt and vinegar chips all the time, and it's actually a real classic thing. If anyone asks me if they're visiting me or visiting my studio if I want a snack, the answer usually is salt and vinegar chips. So yeah, can confirm I'm addicted to salt and vinegar chips because of pottery. So you can see I'm just still working that band, but we're just trying to get it to the point where we can't see it. So just still working it until it all becomes one. So if anyone is trying this at home and they have any questions about this, if you're finding that any of it's not working or something weird's happening, feel free to ask me while I'm still here. What do you do if clay cracks too much? So if the clay is really dry, that's when it'll tend to crack a lot. So what you can do, if it seems like it's cracking because it's dry, you can just add a little bit of water or a little bit of vinegar to your finger and kind of try to blend those cracks over and fill them in with the clay. But yeah, usually it's just when you're working with clay that's maybe a little bit too dry is often when it'll start cracking. The other thing as well is when you're making pinch pots, I find that a lot of students will just I always say you want to try and get the cracks out as you see them develop. So, like pinch for a while and then like rub some cracks out, and then pinch for a bit and rub some cracks out. Because what can happen is as you pinch the clay will move and then kind of sort of split open. And then if you don't sort of as you go fix the cracks, then they can become quite big and dry and hard to rejoin later. So a bit more of like a prevention rather than cure as you go along, if you can, is just sort of getting onto them as you go. So don't wait till you finish your pinch pot and then get rid of the cracks. Sort of do it as you go, and you might find that will help as well. But yeah, a little bit of water if it's a bit dry and cracking is really useful, but not too much, because otherwise it'll end up becoming really sloppy and it won't have any structure anymore. How long have I been doing ceramics? I was actually thinking about this today, and I started my business in 2017, so mid-2017. So it's been, what's that? Is that 2.5 years?
3?
Well, nearly 3 years. Nearly 3 years since I've been doing it as a business, and then that means nearly 2.5 years since I've been doing it full time. And then before that, I was doing it as a hobby for a couple of years. So I probably have been doing it for like nearly 5 years altogether, or 5.5 years. I'm not very good at maths, obviously.
Someone else asked, if you have made a pinch pot and it ends up uneven, what's the best way to cut it so that it is even?
So actually, the best way to cut a pinch pot, I find, especially if you're a beginner, so you can cut it with a knife, but it's a bit tricky and you might run the risk of accidentally cutting too much off. So handy at-home thing that you'll be able to find, and this is actually something that I scavenged from home a long time ago and still have in my studio and actually use, a carrot or potato peeler or whatever you want to call it. So this is really handy because it's got a blade that's guarded, so you can't actually cut too much off. So what you want to do, say if you've got a rim that's kind of uneven after you've finished it. So for example, we've got this. You can use this once your pot has firmed up a little bit, that's the best time to do it. So leave it for an hour or so that way you're not just going to go carving all the way through, but you can actually just use this to take a little bit off at a time and then just smooth it out with your fingers. So this is really good because if you use a knife, you run the risk of kind of going through and accidentally going all the way like down that way and then cutting too much off. So if you've got an uneven pot, try using a carrot peeler. That's my other hot tip for the day. Alright, so now that I've got my belt or my supporting coil that all blended in, at this point you can sort of start to shape your form, because at the moment, since it's all sealed, there's a bit of an airlock going on inside. So you can kind of use that airlock to your advantage. Obviously you don't want to press too hard, but you can manipulate it a little bit at this point to try and get the shape that you want. So I want this to kind of be a bit ovally, so I'm just trying to get that going. And I've decided that I don't want any feet on my vase, but you could add feet on it to stabilize it. But if you have a vase, or sorry, a form that's rounded at the bottom, you can just use the table and kind of tap it on there, and that will, as you can see, that kind of flattens the bottom. So you can use a table as a tool as well. Just make sure you're careful not to stick it on the table, because otherwise you have to rip apart your pot to get it off, and that's annoying. I did that a lot at the start. So I've got my nice flat bottom and I'm quite happy with the shape of this, so now I can go on to the next stage, which is starting to personalize it. So I'm going to turn this into a vase. If you actually like just the closed form in its simplicity, what you can do if you want to have just an object, you can leave it as is, but you can't fire it like this because it's completely sealed. So if in the case that you did want to just leave it as a form, in an inconspicuous spot, get a skewer or a toothpick and just prick a little hole in it. So literally just a pinhole like that in a spot where you can't see it is enough, just so the air can get out. If you don't do that, it'll explode in the kiln. So if you want to just have a nice sort of rock form, you can do that. But I've decided that I want to turn this into a vase. So I'm going to cut a hole in the top. And so I've just done a hole in the top. So this is also even a nice thing just for a little, go for a walk and get some nice overhanging branches or flowers. So you can have it something like really simple like this. But I want to make a little lip at the top, so I'm just making this hole a bit bigger with my hands, and I'm just going to kind of pinch the clay up against my finger like this. So this is just an idea of how you can personalize it. Obviously you can kind of let your imagination go and try a few different things. So you could even make a few little pairs of small pinch pots and make a few different little vases and just try different ways to make them all look different to one another.
Two people have asked, can the pinhole be on the bottom, or will the kiln shelf block the air from escaping?
It can be on the bottom. Yep, that's fine. So the pinhole can be on the bottom, or like on the bottom and like slightly off to the side if you're really worried, but it should be fine for it to be able to just fit on the bottom. So I'm just sort of forming a little lip at the top. Some other ideas of different additions or designs that you could put to make a different sort of bottle-like shape. You could make a little small tiny pinch pot, like a low one, and you could put a hole in that and then stick that to the top. So you could just make a simple little thing like this, and you could, you know, if you have a little hole, you could stick that on the top. You could put some handles on this. So again, with your joins, just score, slip, shimmy, smooth, and support. So I'm just going to put a couple of little handles on just to show you a quick example. And so this is going to transform my potato into a vase. So I'm just going to score the part that I want to attach to my vase. And I'm going to choose where I want it to go. So I just want them to go kind of in the center on the sides. So I'll just score them like that. Again, this is just an idea, you don't have to necessarily do this, but just to give you some ideas of how you can personalize your closed vessel potato. And then I'm just going to, so score, slip, I'm attaching it and I'm shimmying it on to make that sort of suck on there. And then I'm going to smooth it out so that the two pieces of clay become one. So I'm just getting in there with my finger. If you've got hand building tools, you might find it easier to use those, but you can just see I've just smoothed that out. And then if you want to be extra sure, and I'm not going to do it now because we're running out of time, but what you can do is if you want to be extra sure that you're not going to get any cracks in the surface and it's not going to fall off in the firing, you can just make a little supporting coil. So get a little extra piece of clay, make a little coil, and then just wrap that around there and then smooth that out. So that's the support element of my 5 S's, if anyone caught that before. So I've got a little handle on there. So I've got my other side that I scored. I'm just going to wet that with a bit of vinegar. And I'm just going to shimmy that on. So that sort of, that wriggling or that shimmying will just help for that to sort of really suction on there. So shimmy it on, smooth it. And then optional but suggested, put a supporting coil around and then smooth that out, and that will just help to strengthen that join.
It looks like it has little hands.
Yeah, cute. Hello! I'm a happy potato with hands. So I need to, obviously, after this, I'll work on this a little bit more and refine it. So it needs a little bit more time and a little bit more love, but just to give you some general ideas. Other ways that you can decorate this, you could put some little feet on the bottom, could be really cute. As I said, you could put sort of like a flared rim on the top. You can think about maybe some different textures that you could do. I really like using these hand building tools or just found objects. So you could find some cool rocks from the garden, or you could find even flowers that you could impress in, or leaves. You can use a toothpick to do some kind of surface decoration. So you could do something like that. These hand building tools, you can use like the different sections of them and press them in to make interesting textures. So you can do something like this. What else? You could do different kind of texture. So lots of different things. Another thing as well is, you can even just sort of exaggerate the dimpling from your fingers because it's a hand-built pot, so it's always going to be nice and organic, or you can just smooth it out. So if you want to make your surface nice and smooth, you can use either your rubber kidney tool or the back of a spoon, and you can kind of smooth that out as well, and that will get you a nice sort of refined finish. Cool. So thank you so much to everybody that's joined me for this little tutorial. I hope that it's a nice fun activity that you feel confident to try at home. If you joined at the last minute and you want to go back and watch this, you'll be able to access it. So I think it'll be saved in the highlights on the Shepparton Art Museum's Instagram. So you'll be able to go back and watch that. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message or anything on Instagram as well.
One last question. Someone asks, do you think it is a better method to colour things using stain or underglaze?
In terms of colouring clay, so if you're colouring clay, the best thing to use is a stain powder. And then you just add that into the clay. But if you want to paint a design on, then you can use a coloured underglaze.
Amazing.
Thank you. Bye.